Hey, it's Kate Gunning. You're watching and listening to the CMO Show with Kate Gunning, and I am so grateful to be joined today by Kim Storin. She's the CMO of Zayo, and she's got such heart. She's going to talk to us about why and how the eviction and economic challenges in Austin relate to how she is a marketer. And we're going to find out all about why her obsession, we'll say, with transformation serves her well in her role. And today I'm joined by Kim Storin, the CMO of Zayo, and we're going to hear all of her CMO stories. Hi. How you doing?
I'm good. It's good to see you today.
Good to see you too. Welcome to our studio.
Absolutely.
We're glad to have you here. Yeah. I am so excited to get to know you a little bit better and to allow our listeners to get to know you too. We were just chatting a little bit before we went on air about how you're from Austin, been here forever. And it's a city I think people who don't live in are really intrigued by, given all the changes.
A lot of changes. I'm actually the chair of the Women's Fund here in Austin and have been involved for many years. And so it's interesting to see because obviously having grown up in Austin, like I can see it with my own eyes, but to have all of the data that Austin Community Foundation provides the Women's Fund of kind of unaffordability and what's happened from an economic security standpoint, especially for women in Central Texas and in Austin. But it's fascinating to see, we look at the growth and it's so exciting for people in our positions. And then when you really look at what that means from, the standpoint of just the equality gap, the ability to earn a living wage and live in this town, it's really changed over the last years. Yeah. So, it's a great story, but it's also, something that's been, heavy on my heart and mind as I see that growth in Austin.
Yeah,
as well.
Definitely. What's the Women's Fund?
So the Women's Fund is a collective giving organization. We're run through the Austin Community Foundation. We give $500,000 every year to nonprofits in Austin that are solving the economic security gap at the intersection of race and gender.
Oh, wow.
And so it's a great way to invest in the community and also be part of the process of identifying those organizations that are really addressing that economic gap. Wow. And we're data driven. We focus on things like housing, healthcare, long-term pregnancy prevention. What am I missing? Childcare and secondary education to really ensure that women in Austin have a chance to earn a living wage and afford to stay in the city.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing
so starting off on that note.
Yeah, that's good.
Not marketing, but.
No, that's good. Look, the not marketing part of the marketers is what we like to talk about here on this show. Right. And I think there's so much about the non-marketing parts of us that informs how we show up as marketers. So it's really special to have this forum to be able to talk to people like you and start with topics like that. Now I'm actually going to ask you the last question first because what you're speaking to kind of speaks to your favorite book recommendation. Yeah. So I'd love if you could share that and just any kind of context for how you even use a book like that to think about the way you think about marketing, if you do.
I don't know if I do know how I do.
So it could be totally unrelated too. That's fine too.
One of the favorite books that I've read in the last few years, and that has just stuck in my mind, right? And that's when you know a book is really powerful, is Evicted. And it was written by Matthew Desmond, and he does some like ethnographic and just research, follows 8 families that are not able to pay their rent.
Wow.
And so it's just really powerful. And it's just a testament to how, we're very privileged and being able to see the impacts, especially of that financial crisis in 2008 on these families, it just really hit me hard. And while it wasn't local, right, I Midwest, is where he focuses on. But it really makes me think about the challenges that we face in Austin and the work that we're trying to do through Austin Community Foundation and the Women's Fund to really solve some of those problems.
Yes.
And we're very data driven. I'm very data driven. A little bit of a data junkie, to be honest, right? But I think how I think about this book with marketing is that sometimes data can't compel you to think differently. Mm-hmm. And so what he does with this book and telling the stories of these 8 families, like obviously it is data, but it's not just shoving stats and facts at you. It's telling those compelling stories of how and why. And I think as a marketer, that's so important for how we think about things, because ultimately data is just one piece of the puzzle, right? The people that we market to are humans, and really understanding the why and the how is more important than just understanding the what.
Yes.
Right? And that ultimately, while data and stats can help us be informed and can help us find the trends, every person we're marketing to is an individual. And so they're not always going to act as your data might indicate.
Absolutely.
And so I think for me, like that's why that type of book is so interesting to me, because it really informs how we get to the data, right? It's those 8 individual families, and that's why the data more broadly shows these trends. So I think that's really, how I connect those dots.
I love that. I think that's really powerful, because what you're saying without saying it is that you allow yourself to think outside of the saying outside of the box just feels so silly, because it's such a it's such an overused phrase, people, outside of the box. But what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say, is that there's something that you can learn even from an economic trend or situation and apply philosophically to your practice marketing.
Absolutely.
Which is really cool, and I think makes you really special, and that's I think that's really cool to be able to uncover a pattern like that and think about how you apply that in your field, and really speaks to what I love talking about, which is like B2B marketing is just brain to brain. Right?
Exactly.
Like human to human.
Exactly.
And that's really easy to forget when you're stuck in just a cycle of MQLs.
The death spiral, spiral of, MQL to SQL, right? And at the end of the day, it's a human connection that matters. And people are buying your technology, your infrastructure, your software, because you solve a problem for them. And we get into this like age-old debate, like, is B2B marketing emotional? Like, yes,
it is. And there's lots of data that says so.
And I would actually go as far to say that it's more of an emotional buying decision than consumer.
Yeah.
Right? Because what's on the line? Like, if you are going to buy a sparkling water, as we talked about, right? Yes. And you're faced with the decision of Richards or Topo.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, make a decision. Like if you have one and you don't love it, like, what's really at risk?
Right.
Well, you think about in the B2B world, the people that I market to, their job's on the line. These are big decisions, sometimes multi-million-dollar decisions. And their reputation within the organization, within their industry, their job rests on whether they're making the right decision with millions of dollars of the company's money.
Yes.
And so there is a lot of emotion, and probably more so than, buying shoes or chips or water or, those consumer products. And so we sit here sometimes as B2B marketers and try to get all in the brain of like data and insights, which is so important. And we do, we need that every day. But ultimately, we have to step back and remember, like, these are really emotional, high risk situations for the people that we're selling and marketing to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was LinkedIn that did a study a couple of years ago about how emotional marketing is more important in B2B than it is in B2C. Important in both, obviously, for different reasons, but imperative because it's such a critical choice for people sometimes.
Right.
Like
and there's a great study. I think it was Google and the corporate executive board that did one, like 5 or 6 years ago. And yet we're still having the same debate.
Yeah.
So it's easy to get back into those old habits, I think, sometimes.
Absolutely, it is. Well, tell me then, what do you think the most important quality for a CMO to have is?
I think it's tenacity. And I think it's even more important now than it's ever been. And that's because I think marketing is really misunderstood. It's undervalued, and we don't have the same definition at every company, right? You look at finance, for example. My dad was a CFO, so finance is very near and dear to my heart. I was reconciling receipts at 10 years old.
Oh, man.
Didn't have a choice. But the function is very well understood, right? It's very clear what a chief financial officer does, what they're responsible for, and the outcomes of what they drive. Marketing, you go talk to 5 different CEOs and you'll get 5 different definitions of marketing.
Yeah.
And
even within the same category.
Oh, yeah.
And then 5X
Exactly.
that when you start talking about all the different categories.
Totally. And so we have to have tenacity because we are constantly fighting to show and demonstrate the value of what we bring to the table. Like we're supposed to be the voice of and the voice to the market.
Yes.
That's a philosophy, a concept. And there's so many ways in which we can do that. So many choices that we can make as CMOs of how to be the voice of and the voice to the market. And I don't think that other executive positions have that same day-to-day decision and that same day-to-day value that they have to communicate and win people over on. And so, having that tenacity, pushing through, being willing to have the same conversation multiple times, continuing to think about how do you break through the noise, not just with the customers and the prospects, but also how do you break through the noise within your own company? Why the heck do we have an ING on our name and our title, and no one else in the C-suite does? There's no chief producting officer.
That's
no
actually
chief
so
selling
awesome.
officer.
Yeah.
Right? We're the only ones that are assumed to be execution focused and not strategic. And so how do we change that? And it requires some grit and tenacity to change that mindset within the organization.
Wow. I had never thought about that before. We are the only C in the C-suite with an ing.
Yep. We're the only ones who execution comes before strategy.
Yes.
When it comes to people thinking about what we do.
That's right.
Right. How many...
What have you done for me lately?
Yeah. Tell me your toolbox and what you have in your toolbox. Not to say that the execution's not important, but again, if I'm supposed to be the voice of and the voice to the market, that is highly strategic.
Yes.
And the tools in my toolbox is just how I execute, not how I think and strategize and plan. And yet we forget that.
Absolutely. That's totally right. And I think that day to day, that can be really hard.
It's exhausting.
Because it's such a overstimulated part of the organization, right?
And I mean, marketing as well, right? In addition to being the only ing, if you will, on the C-suite.
Marketing is the only ing. Let's write that down.
That's right. We're also the only member of the C-suite that is expected to be an innate collaborator at every moment of every day.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. You're very good at calling it like it is.
Right? We are expected, and we are, right? We are innate collaborators. That's what makes us special. We sit at the intersection of brand and product and customer, right? Sales, but we're expected to understand the entire end-to-end customer journey, which means on a daily basis, I'm talking to sales, I'm talking to product, I'm talking to service delivery, I'm talking to customer success. And I don't know that any of my peers have the same expectation of collaborating, number one, and number two, understanding, right? Like if you're responsible for that end-to-end journey and for understanding, that voice of the market, you've got to be able to talk the talk and straddle all these different functions.
Yes.
So it's a hard job. And I think we don't recognize how challenging it is, because sometimes we're so caught up in that execution toolbox that we're just talking, well, like, how many clicks did I get on my website, and what's my engagement rate, and how many people liked my LinkedIn post, and how many people showed up at my event. And we get so into like that execution process that we forget all the work and strategy that goes into that end to end and the collaboration. So I think that's why CMOs are exhausted.
I would agree.
Right?
Yes. I feel that this is something that a lot of people will connect with. And it also, I think it can be overwhelming to join a team that's super in high execution mode.
Yep.
And to have to figure out how to unpack, how to lead it and elevate the thinking in a way that's empowering. Like that, I find that personally can be very challenging as well.
Well, and I mean, one of the most fun things that I've done in my career and that I find myself being drawn to is I like to find and uncover the problems that you don't recognize that you have.
Yes.
And so I remember joining AMD and being asked to lead the brand transformation. And this is back in the day. I mean, stock price was like in the $1.50 realm, right? Compared to where it is now. I think it's 1,000% gain over the last years.
I hope you got some shares in AMD.
Some, not as many as I would have. Or I guess I shouldn't say that. I should have held on to them a little bit longer. Was maybe the lesson on that one. But what was really interesting is everyone kept saying we have an awareness challenge, right? Go fix the awareness problem. Like everybody knows Intel, nobody knows AMD. And when we actually dug into the research and the data, we didn't have an awareness problem. We had a consideration problem. And that's where I find that I really get energized, right, is on uncovering. So everyone assumed one thing, but at the end of the day, it's actually something else that's the challenge that we have to go solve for to be successful. And so those are the things that I think are really energizing for CMOs. And I think if we can continue to not get caught up, right, in the, like, let that team go, let them execute for a bit. Take the time to really understand what the real challenge is. Do you have a category challenge, right? Which is very different than if you have an awareness challenge. Is it a consideration challenge, which is very different than a category challenge or an awareness challenge? Do you have an execution challenge, right? Maybe you've solved for all those top of the funnel issues, but you're not connecting the brand to demand. But if you can't step back as a CMO and get out of the execution for a while, and sometimes that's hard for us, right? Because we want to fix the things that we can see and think that we can fix immediately, when we need to be like, take a deep breath, have a little bit of patience, let that execution machine continue while we step back and really figure out what's the problem that we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
And then you can go fix the execution to match to that problem. But if you go in and solve the execution challenge without really understanding that fundamental, like deep-rooted root cause, execution's going to be mismatched to the challenge.
Absolutely. Do you think that the reason CMO turnover has been so high is because of the dynamics that you're explaining now?
I think it's mismatched expectations. One of the things that I've found, and I've worked for some enlightened and some less enlightened CEOs, right?
Yes, I understand.
Point taken. But I think, ultimately, we as CMOs understand the connection between brand and demand, right? The intersect, like that's the holy grail, right? But you can't do one without the other. And you have to be able to focus on the full funnel, the full journey, whatever framework you want to apply, right? And I think there's still an old school mentality in a lot of the CEO and C-suite roles that, especially in B2B, right? I think this is different than consumer, right? That the MQL to SQL conversion is the end all be all of marketing. And I think that's why the turnover is so high, right? Because either it's on one side where the CMO is like, give me a break. Like, we don't have an MQL problem, right? I mean, MQLs are dead. We all know this, right? They are in the mortuary. Put the corpse away. Like, they are dead. And yet, like, we still find ourselves talking about this. Like, we should be talking about high intent opportunities. We should be talking about, the conversion and, building relationships, long-term relationships with our customers. And yet, how many times do you get, are you getting pulled into those conversations and those report outs to talk about pipeline, MQL to SQL. And, either the CEO is not happy because you keep walking into those meetings and talking about brand demand and, high intent and, the full funnel, but, or it's the marketer saying, this is exhausting. I'm tired of having to demonstrate my value all the time. And so that's why I think there's so much work that we can do to continue to educate, the CEOs and the full executive team to really understand what it means to be the voice of and the voice to the market.
What's the way that you do that?
It's slow going. I mean, I'll be honest, right? It starts with having a philosophy and but also being able to show some wins that are connecting the dots. But it's an ongoing challenge.
Yeah.
And it's an ongoing conversation, and you win some, you lose some. So I don't know that there's a magic bullet beyond building relationship and credibility and trust and being able to, show. I try in every meeting, executive meeting that I'm in, every board meeting that I'm in, I try to represent the voice of the market. And so that's one way that, like, instead of like jumping, I will get to your pipeline stats. Don't worry. But let me tell you first what's happening in the market and what our customers are saying and what our like satisfaction scores are and what the people that we wish were our customers think about us or think about our category or think about the world right now. Yeah. And how is that going to impact us? And so I think sometimes it's that behavior of just getting into that mentality of showcasing the insights of the market before you get to like, here's the pipeline and here's my, digital metrics and here's my KPIs. You have to get there, right? And that's what helps build credibility on the back end. But always starting that conversation with the market first, I think, is the first way to subliminally get them on board with where you're going.
And the why behind the pipeline too, I think, is
right.
And like, let's take a minute to allow that part of the conversation to occur as well. Right?
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
This is what we're seeing and this is why. And the why is almost more important than the actual numbers themselves, I think, sometimes too.
Absolutely.
I think what you're saying is interesting, and it's making me think of this concept around matchmaking between a CMO and a CEO. And for me, that has been one of the most important success factors.
Agree more.
Right? Like, if you're philosophically misaligned, it's going to be really hard. And it will continue to be. And even if there's a really vocal leader that's totally philosophically in another realm, right? It's extremely challenging. And so what I want to encourage people around right now is speaking up for yourself in that around, maybe this isn't the right role for you, and you get to decide that.
Right.
If you feel like there's a fundamental misalignment.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise, it's like what the definition of insanity, like doing the same thing over and over again, showing pipeline results week on week and like praying that on
it's going to change
the next week that the response is going to change. Like, no, it's not going to. So sometimes just got to know when to lean in and you're getting receptivity, and then when to just dip out.
Exactly. Yes, I think so. I think number one is leadership alignment.
Yeah.
CEO to CMO alignment is probably the number one factor of turnover, right? Yeah. And then I think the other piece too, and again, I think it depends. Like, if you're growing an organization, you're in that kind of like fake it till you make it, VC funded SaaS world, right? Like, maybe this is a different statement, but I think when you are in a turnaround, when you are in a transformation, that not having accountability for the full realm of marketing is also a challenge. Yeah. So I think if you're a CMO who does not own product marketing, you are in for a world of challenge in B2B, right? Because great demand gen, great revenue marketing starts with product marketing and ends with product marketing.
Or things like call lines, like to go back to your MQL to SQL example. Right. Well, why is the close rate so low? Well, the recommendations that we've made for how to make that more possible are not being implemented. Like FYI, y'all. Mm-hmm. So I agree. I think that there's this disjointed thing that happens when marketing is expected to drive the whole thing soup to nuts. Right. But yet it's not accountable.
Right.
And I want to ask you, because we're about to be up on time, the most important question of the day. And I wish we could talk for 3 more hours, but we don't have that luxury. What is your superpower as a marketer or as a person? You can answer it however you like, but I want to know what you think.
Well, I think ultimately for me, again, because I think as CMOs, we have to really uncover where our passion is and what we love. And that's when our superpowers really arise.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so for me, like I've found I am a transformation junkie, right? And I gave SaaS a shot, right? Like I said, like I want to do VC, I want to do a startup. It wasn't me. And I just have found that like I'm a turnaround, I'm a transformation junkie. And so I really think my superpower is a transformation architect.
Cool.
And like I really can, I enjoy map making and path making, whether it's with my customers or with, my teams, like charting our own path. Like we know something's not working here, right? That's why we're in a turnaround, right? If it was all rosy, we'd be growing like crazy. And so I really enjoy kind of looking at the data, looking at that code, understanding kind of the art and science, but then also in addition to the art and science, it's the culture, right? And it's the culture of the organization. And that's why I think I'm really passionate about it. And why it gets me up in the morning, right? Like it's the adrenaline of the turnaround and the transformation. And that's where I really find that I shine, because you do require both like that strategic and that execution mindset. And so I think that ultimately is what sets me apart from, other marketers.
That's awesome. Well, if anybody needs help with transformation junkie tips,
there you go.
Hit us up and we'll get you in touch with Kimberly.
Sounds great.
Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was super fun.
Yeah, absolutely.